My name is Carol Lewis. I'm the property editor for The Times and The Sunday Times. Welcome to this session, which is towards a decarbonised economy. We're very lucky to have here with us Dr. Delton Chen, who is the founder and project director for Global Carbon Reward. Now, he's going to introduce us to a new international carbon currency. Now, note, it's not a carbon offsetting credit, it's not a cryptocurrency, but it is a digital asset that Dr. Chen thinks will incentivise real and lasting change. Now, so he's going to give us a presentation, get into the detail, then we're going to come back here and discuss it with our experts, who are Lucy Yu, who is Connected Places Capital Executive Director and Chief Executive for the Centre for Net Zero for Octopus Energy, and Catherine McGuinness, who's also an Executive Director at Connected Places Catapult and the former Policy and Resources Chair at the City for London Corporation. So please welcome Dr. Chen to the podium.
Thank you. Well, greetings everybody. It's wonderful to be here in London. And before I start, I would just like to quickly thank Gonzalo Herrero and his team and Ecocity Builders for making this presentation possible. So this presentation is about a new economic theory and policy. This approach or the policy is transdisciplinary and it's new. And I think it could be a breakthrough because it offers a way to provide scalable climate finance, to upscale new technologies, and to create a more regenerative world economy for people and planet. So in this presentation, I'll structure it with a problem space, solution space, and I'll begin with the risks and the disputes over climate change economics. Then I'll explain the new policy called, as Carol said, a global carbon reward. Briefly, what it is, how it works, and some examples at the end. So, risks. Let's think about climate risks. The IPCC, as you know, they issue reports, and the Assessment Report 6 came out recently with this diagram called the burning embers diagram. And what it shows us is the approximate level of risk for different temperatures. Now, the problem is that risks can keep increasing and damages keep increasing whenever the Earth warms more and more incrementally. But also, the risks actually increase through time because over time the scientists begin to learn more about the climate system and the complex systems that make up the Earth. And there's an understanding that initially we don't fully understand what's going on. The more we learn, generally speaking, we see more risks. There are clear bands of risk as well. For example, you can see undetectable risk below 1 degree, but we're now at 1.2 degrees. At 1.2, we had 40 degrees Celsius record temperatures in the UK last year. Europe had record summer heat last year. China, Pakistan, droughts and floods, as you know. So it's becoming quite serious. Also, we're going to pass the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees quite soon, in the next 2 to 7 years, and we expect to see 1.5 degrees of global warming sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. So these are the problems, and we want to avoid going beyond 2 degrees because obviously the risks will become even worse, significantly worse, into high and very high zones of risk and damage. Now, there's another problem with global warming and climate change, and that is the economic theory and what we do about it is really not clear. In fact, I would say there are fundamental disputes over what we're supposed to do, including polarisation over some key ideas. So, for example, some people think we should try to develop with the model of green growth. Other people say that's not going to work, we need degrowth. This is a complex problem. We'll talk about that soon. Low versus high carbon taxes. Okay, so some economists argue for a high tax, others a low tax. Who's right? It depends on their models and their inputs, the damage function, the time discount rate, so nobody really knows for sure. And then carbon dioxide removal, it's probably needed, but some people are worried if we promote it, maybe politically we won't try to decarbonise quickly enough and we'll burn too much fossil fuels because we think we can fix it with removal. So these are examples of polarisation. There's also ambiguity over key ideas. Carbon offsetting is a really good example. If you've been reading the newspaper, The Guardian in particular, you probably heard that some reporters did a review and they found that carbon credits and offsetting are a bit greenwashing. Yeah? They're not well regulated and there are problems, serious problems. Natural methods generally are also complex inherently because soils, plants, forests, etc., they don't necessarily store carbon permanently. In fact, they can give it up for lots of reasons if they're disturbed, for example. So more generally, the clean energy transition is a point of ambiguity because some people say we can do it with windmills and solar panels, but then again, if you look at the details, for all of this new technology and wind and solar farms, we're going to need a lot of metals, like rare earth metals, copper, molybdenum, zinc, and so on. And there's really not enough space as well with today's technologies. So the point is that there are a lot of problems that aren't really resolved, and what I propose is that this new approach, with this policy called the Global Carbon Reward, could be a potential resolution to most, if not all, of these theoretical problems. So what is it? What is the Global Carbon Reward? Well, by way of history, I started this project 9 years ago, and I started with two assumptions. The first assumption was I assumed we needed a currency instrument. Okay, that's unusual, but that's what I intuitively thought. And I also thought that with my background in the natural sciences and engineering, I could contribute something new, something innovative to this economic problem of lack of finance, climate finance. So after all that time, my analysis falls on this solution, and the solution is a carbon currency with this unit of account. And it's very specifically 1 tonne of CO2 equivalent strategically mitigated for a 100-year duration. Strategically refers to the idea that we would only issue the currency for projects and work that is really significant and important to move the dial, so to speak. The 100 years refers to permanence. So in this approach, we don't just hand out rewards, currency, we require long-term contracts called service level agreements. So we continually review projects and do the accounting on a permanent basis so we can adjust for leakage and problems like that. So very quickly, as it was already said a moment ago, it's not a carbon credit, so we solved some problems there. It's not a cryptocurrency, it's not a medium of exchange, meaning you can't buy anything with it, ironically. It's just a financial digital asset that can be traded in currency markets. So if you own lots of carbon currency and you want to buy something, just trade it for British pound sterling or euros, and then you can spend your money. Some of you may have heard of Kim Stanley Robinson and his novel, The Ministry for the Future. He actually came across my work and it inspired him to write about it in his recent novel. So his novel refers to carbon coin, and he uses it as an idea to explain how the world could resolve this climate crisis. Now, what about economic growth? Okay, because green growth versus degrowth. Let's have a look at this. Let's think about it conceptually by looking at this three-dimensional diagram. The x-axis is time, the y-axis is world GDP, and the circles represent the absolute mass of greenhouse gases being emitted. So obviously this is kind of a dirty growth scenario. The two main options that have been put forward and are being discussed are green growth and degrowth. Green growth comes from the sustainability narrative. It's been around since maybe the early 90s. The degrowth idea is a bit older. It was born out of the Limits to Growth report, And the difference is that green growth stays with the current economic system. It has some strong points. It promotes innovation in green finance, impact investing. It promotes entrepreneurial, innovation. However, it has some weaknesses. And one weakness is that it doesn't really offer a scalable financial mechanism to fill the multi-trillion-dollar finance gap for climate mitigation. And it tends not to really address the planetary boundaries properly because there are major resource limits and, as you can understand. Now, degrowth, on the other hand, it has strengths and weaknesses. Its strength is that it does acknowledge the planetary boundaries and resource limits. However, in my opinion, its weakness is that it doesn't really offer a clear financial mechanism for managing the world economy and the financial system. Because our financial system is unstable. And if we don't have enough economic activity and growth, I shouldn't say that word, but enough economic activity, we could fall into recession or depression. And this is related to the fact that our economy is structured by debt. Importantly, the currencies we use are created through debt creation. Banks create money when they lend. So what do we do about this problem? A potential resolution is this new concept called optimal growth. What does that mean? Well, it's a new concept that's different in that we introduce a parallel economy, which is represented by the blue circles. So we have our existing economy, the first economy, and as you can see, it's being mitigated, but the reason it works this way is because the other economy is also taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And the idea is that the blue circles represent carbon removal, and eventually they've got to balance to get to net zero. So the first economy is for production and consumption. That's the economy we currently have. And the second economy will be introduced with the carbon currency for the purpose of providing a safe carbon budget. The two economies will interact, and this is to reallocate capital for decarbonisation. So this idea is new. Let's have a closer look, because to understand it a bit better, we just need to focus our attention on the idea that the first economy is actually structured by fiat currencies, which are the national currencies created through debt. The second economy, it's structured by our new carbon currency, true, but it's not created through debt. It's issued against climate mitigation services. So we're starting to resolve this debt problem. The policy that creates the second economy, it will manage capital and energy resource reallocation to mitigation via the policy rules and the exchange rate between the new currency and the old currencies. The purpose or the goal is to reduce emissions from the first economy and to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere to balance everything out. This relationship between the two economic types is actually analogous, in my opinion, to symbiosis in ecosystems. So if you've studied a little bit of biology, you would have heard the word symbiosis and the notion of mutual symbiosis, where systems are helping each other by specialising with different activities. There are other insights embodied into this approach which are not necessarily obvious, and one important insight that I think has been overlooked is the idea that when you combine carrots and sticks in policy in certain combinations, you actually can maximise cooperation. So this has been discovered by social scientists. They've done experiments on groups of people, and they tried different combinations of carrots and sticks, and they found that carrots and sticks together have a profound effect on improving cooperation. So when you think about it, our climate problem has a lot to do with a lack of cooperation. Carrots and sticks are a surprisingly inexpensive and widely applicable method of promoting cooperation. Now, that's one key idea. Also behind this approach is a lot of other theory to do with Arthur Bourdieu's pricing, the Coase theorem, externalities, which we don't have time to go over, so I'll spare you that. But if you're interested, download our policy paper and you can read about it in the Appendix A. So how does the global carbon reward actually work? To explain it functionally, let's start by looking at the carbon budget. So what you see here is the allowable carbon budget for civilization if we were to stay at 1.5 degrees, as an example. The CO2 emissions that are allowable are shown as green at the top, and then the other greenhouse gases. And you'll notice that towards the end of the century, we have residual emissions. So to counter that, we would need carbon dioxide removal, direct air capture, or whatever you want to call it, until they balance to net zero CO2 at about 2050 and net zero greenhouse gases at about 2070 this century. Now, from a standard perspective, standard economics, economists would say we need taxes or sticks. And they estimate roughly between $40 to $100 a tonne by the year 2030 and even higher through the century to target the Paris goal. But as you know, taxes, sticks are just not very popular and we can't really achieve those prices. So we need more carrots. And it's been estimated that the cost of the conventional mitigation will be of the order of $3 to $6 trillion a year additional. And then we will need that $1 trillion a year for the carbon removal. So where's this money going to come from? Well, what I propose is that our carbon rewards, this policy, can provide that finance in a targeted way using 3 rules. The first rule for cleaner energy is fairly straightforward. It offers carbon currency to buy out fossil fuels and to quickly transition out of coal-fired power plants, etc. I'll expand on this at the end with an example. The second rule for cleaner business is very general. It goes across all sectors and industries, and effectively we just offer rewards to incentivise decarbonisation. And the 2 rules, we use them in a coordinated way because rule 1 is about energy supply, rule 2 is about energy demand, and you want to balance them out because if you don't have that balance of supply and demand, energy prices will become erratic and that will destabilise the financial system. So there's an ability here to guide energy prices as we decarbonise. And then finally, rule 3, carbon removal. That's pretty straightforward. Important is that the reward for rule 3 actually structures the whole policy. This is a technical point, but we're going to actually calibrate the reward and the carbon currency value specifically for carbon removal as an explicit price. I'll explain that in a moment, but some of you might be thinking, what about regeneration? What about community and ecosystems? To address this question, this challenge, we put forward 3 more rules. 1 for energy reliability, community wellbeing, 5 or 6 ecosystem health. And the idea here is to create a virtuous circle of investing. And what that means simply is we'll create a secondary price signal and incentive for regeneration. The way it will work, just very quickly, is that we'll invite stakeholders to form their own collectives and they can put forward their advice as to what they want for co-benefits and what harms they want to avoid. We use the information to point score projects, and then with these scores we can readjust their rewards higher or lower depending on co-benefits and harms. So that's the virtuous circle of investing. Okay, now we're getting into some technical stuff. Bear with me. It's maybe not as difficult as it looks to digest, but what you're looking at here is the reward price that's calibrated for that carbon removal we need through the century. The vertical axis is the value of our carbon currency as an exchange rate. Note that it has the ticker XCC, that's for carbon currency, compared to the US dollar. And what we do is we prescribe the floor price to be high enough and we don't let the exchange rate fall below the floor price. And the way that's done is with a public finance guarantee provided by central banks. So this is where central banks come in the picture. They're going to underwrite the value of the currency. They set this floor, and the actual spot price can fluctuate anywhere above the floor. The idea is that with the floor price rising, we actually manage the currency as an investment vehicle. That means the private sector will want to buy it because they can see a profit opportunity, and it's also good for the planet. Now, just concluding with one more point is that this long-term price is very important, because if we don't have a long-term predictable price, then we don't have the ability to incentivise large capex projects, and we need this price to attract a lot of investment into research and development. How are we going for time? Good? 5 more minutes. Okay, I better hurry. So what I'm going to explain now is just the financial mechanism in simple terms. How does it work? Well, we need a new institution called the Carbon Exchange Authority. It issues the currency to projects. In return, they record these service level agreements as their asset. When the projects receive the currency, they might want to spend it at some point. They would have to trade it for local currencies in currency markets. Private buyers will buy it for various reasons, but if there's not enough demand, then our central banks, that's most of the central banks in the world, will buy the currency to defend our floor price. It'll be recorded as an asset on their balance sheet, and they issue more national currency as their liability. So I'm going to finish off with just a few examples. It'll only take 5 minutes. I'll go through it fairly quickly. This might help us understand how the policy works. So oil and gas extraction is a major problem. Governments are planning to extract 100% more than we're supposed to for the Paris Agreement. And extraction is occurring in the Amazon, Congo Basin and so on. How do we arrest this problem? Well, what we can do is we can offer to buy out the oil and gas leases with the carbon currency. We'd offer enough currency to cover the expected profits on these oil and gas fields, and then we would tie in the leaseholders into a contract where they have to use most of the carbon currency to build out new renewable energy assets, utility scale and community scale energy. And in this way, what we're doing is we're setting up an energy asset exchange from dirty fossil fuels to clean energy, and this will help developing countries in particular skip the Industrial Revolution. The second example is for Rule 2, and this is probably of interest to people here at the Ecocity Summit. And we have a problem with building cities. They produce about 18% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's a complex problem because of fragmented ownership of buildings and so on. The idea here is we can offer the reward as a wholesale price to fiscal sponsors who will manage all the retrofitting. These companies will then offer a retail price to the building owners, and what we'll do is we'll set these prices just high enough to attract enough retrofitting. So it's a cost-effectiveness approach. And this is a way to insulate buildings and electrify them and so on. And I'm at the last slide now, so I'll just conclude with an example for carbon removal, which is going to be necessary because we're going to overshoot the carbon budget. We have residual emissions, we have climate feedbacks, which could be underestimated, and conventional decarbonisation could be too slow. So what do we do? Well, in this example, I chose algal farming because it's an interesting new technology which shows promise. So we simply use the reward as an explicit reward price to the world market, and then basically that's it. If the technologies work, they get funded. Algal farming is interesting because it uses abundant resources. It uses seawater, sunshine, and it can be rolled out in areas, say around the Middle East, where there's a lot of land that's not being used for too many other things. It will sequester carbon at a low price. We can store that carbon in the soil at shallow depth, and it can also be used to produce feedstock that's carbon neutral, such as chemicals and biofuels. My point here is simply this. There's a lot of potential for innovation over the next 100 years. If we want to resolve this problem in the real world, my argument is we need this long-term reward price for its predictability and scalability so that project owners of large capex projects can take the risk to scale up. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.